We've talked a bit about materialism. We've talked about dualism. And in your books, you kind of put forth a third option where fundamental reality is mind-based. Does one need to have some sort of belief in a God to adopt a sort of mind-based view of reality?
I do believe that if you pursue this reasoning to its end, you do arrive at the understanding of God in the sort of the classical theistic sense that you find in philosophical Judaism and Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Sikhism, all the great isms that have any sort of theistic contours, that there is one principle from which all else comes, and that one is an infinite act, not only of being, but of mind. So, yes, I think you can't avoid theism in the highest classical sense, but whether that gets you to the God of faith or not, that's a much longer conversation, and one to which I have fewer answers.
I'm wondering what we can learn from Eastern traditions about mind that we may have overlooked in the sort of Western history, whether through modern science or elsewhere.
Where Indian tradition excelled from early on, and I think this was because, first, Buddhism and the debates with Buddhists that took place in the subcontinent before the Christian era, was in phenomenological investigations of the phenomena of consciousness itself. We have philosophies of mind in the West before that, in the sense that we had philosophies of spiritual beings who are also bodies. But actually, consciousness as such, and its enigmas, and the things that make it very hard to reduce to material causality, we did not explore in the West until relatively recently, really. We had to be challenged by the mechanical philosophy, because under the challenge of the mechanical philosophy, we had to start thinking about what is mind? What does it do? In India, of course, this had already happened in Abhidhamma Buddhism, a very rigorous approach to trying to break this down into just causal, phenomenal successions, streams of causality. Now, of course, they're not strict materialists, but they had a sort of impersonal and non-theistic understanding of the generation of mind through the 12-fold field of interdependent co-origination, paticca. And because of that, the great schools of Hindu philosophy and the great renaissance of Hindu thought that happened in the Common Era was always already engaged with this. So you find it in Vedanta of every school. You find it in Kashmiri Shaivism. You find all these high metaphysical systems. And so there are incredibly rigorous examinations from which there's still a lot to learn.
I want to ask next, if we were to adopt a perspective of thinking that there's a mind-based reality, that fundamentally what is real is mind and everything comes from it, is that going to have some practical implications on how we live our lives and how we kind of view ourselves in this world?
I would hope so. I think that when we talk about the mechanical philosophy, even when we think that we believe in God or so, we place that within the perspective of a fairly mechanized view of reality. We see all of nature as disenchanted and dispirited. We've adopted this dualistic prejudice, so we see nature as just a sort of endless reservoir of resources to be exploited by capitalism and by science, without much thought to whether it has a numinous or a spiritual dimension and a dignity of its own worth preserving and loving. And living our lives online in a virtual space in which we're all being absorbed into this machinery. And reality, more and more, isn't direct contact with the strangeness and the mystery of being and of nature and the beauty of that strangeness and the terror, but rather the sort of prepackaged reality, the virtual sphere where we make up our own realities, political, moral, historical, but ultimately economic. What we're being reduced to are parts of an economic machine which is gradually but relentlessly consuming the natural world, which we've decided has no spiritual depth to it, and converting it into the abstract realm of value, which is just to say wealth, which exists in a virtual space until we've exhausted all of it and the machine runs down. We treat each other as machines. We treat our world as a machine. We live like machines. And if we're going to redeem ourselves and maybe even redeem our technology, we're going to have to stop thinking that mechanism is the ground of reality and get back to what, Robert Rosen saw as the true basic laws, life itself, and try to understand what that means.